Gini Dietrich. She is the founder and CEO of Dietrich, a Chicago-based integrated marketing communications firm. She is also the founder of the professional development site for PR and communication marketing professionals, Spin Sucks Pro. You'll see a little bit of Spin Sucks behind you. She's the co-author of Marketing in the Round and the author of the new book, which some of you may have received if you were the first 50 registrants for the conference, Spin Sucks, Communication and Reputation Management in the Digital Age. Please help me in welcoming Miss Gini Dietrich.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I have like 25 microphones on. Can you hear me? Rachel, I'd like to tell you that there are not actually 900 steps. There are only 82. I counted them. I'm sure it seems like 900 going up, coming down, not so bad. Before we get started, one of the very first things that I find happen when I speak is that people are on IMDb on their phones trying to figure out who I look like, so we're just going to go ahead and tell you who it is. Although I did just cut my hair, so maybe it's less. Maybe? Yes? No? Maybe so? Did you get your picture?
I did.
Okay. So I want to start out by talking about sex. And that's one of those things that everybody understands, everybody knows, everybody likes, I assume. I want to talk about sex from Miley Cyrus's perspective. Now, Miley Cyrus started out as Hannah Montana. Everybody remembers Hannah Montana? Nice Disney star, clean cut, cute blonde girl, very popular with the teens and tweens, very, very big star. As part of being a Disney star, however, you have very strict stipulations. They tell you what you can wear, what color your hair can be, how long it can be, what color your fingernails are, the color on your fingernails, the makeup that you wear. They stipulate every possible thing that they can about your lives. Now granted, you in return get a lot of money and fame for those things, but a lot of you were teenage girls. Not everybody in this room, but a lot of you were teenage girls. You remember what it was like to have somebody tell you what you could and couldn't do as a teenager? Doesn't work out so well, does it? Nope. My dad used to say, you have to be home by 10 o'clock or I lock the doors. I cannot tell you how many times my brothers and I got locked out of the house over and over and over again. So here's the deal with Hannah Montana. She decides that once her contract is over, she wants to shed the clean girl image, and she wants to be more like Madonna and Lady Gaga and even Britney Spears. She wants to let her style come out. She wants to be able to talk about what she wants to talk about. She wants to wear what she wants to wear. She wants to, she wants to cut her hair in a mohawk if she wants. She wants to wear hardly any clothes. She gets to do nasty things to my boyfriend, Robin Thicke. And she can even, although my real boyfriend's Robert Downey Jr., if anybody in here can hook me up. Are we going to have to fight? Okay. All right, awesome. She even released a music video that was safe for work and one that was not safe for work. When she went on the VMAs with the Robin Thicke tongue finger thing, everybody was up in arms. I cannot believe that this just happened. What is she thinking? What is she doing? What a horrible young lady. Where are her parents? Everybody talked about it. This whole viral storm created by one performance on one show. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew, now maybe she didn't. She probably had a great team behind her, right, of communications professionals. But they knew exactly what they were doing. What happened was VMAs, then the firestorm, all the media, I mean, everybody talked about it. Wall Street Journal, CNN, Huffington Post, everyone was talking about it. I even blogged about it, and I'm certainly not at that level. Then she released the music video for Wrecking Ball. This one is the Safe for Work. Then she did a mini documentary where she talked about why she was doing these things. And she talked about the fact that she was shedding this clean-cut little girl image, and she was becoming herself. And she was getting rid of that Disney-inspired, I have to be exactly who they want me to be image, and becoming myself. And then she released some not safe for work photos, which I tried to make them as safe as I could for this. And then it culminated on the following weekend with Saturday Night Live. And she said, I'm not going to do Hannah Montana, but I can give you an update on what she's been doing. She's been murdered. What happened was really, really interesting because everybody went into Saturday night going, this little girl doesn't know what she's doing. Her parents are non-existent. She's completely out of character, out of whack. She's gone off the crazy train. It's completely all over for her. And then look at the Twitter stream. People were tweeting like crazy. She killed it. She made fun of herself. She was self-deprecating. She talked about the one thing that she didn't want to talk about by saying she's been murdered, and it was a home run. It was a PR textbook case study, 101, perfectly done. It worked for her because she's selling sex. When you're selling sex, sex works. When you're not selling sex, however, not so much. I'll give you a couple examples. Oh, sorry. It's for GoDaddy, not NASCAR. GoDaddy, not selling sex, as it turns out. Web hosting. This is my favorite one. It'll blow your mind, the BK Super 7-incher. Really? Really. This really is an ad that they published. Uh-huh. Yep. Talk about spin sucking. Wow. And Jack in the Box, treat yourself to something extra, not like a massage or anything, just what's on the menu. Now, how many of you go to Jack in the Box or Burger King or GoDaddy for sex? Not one person. Wow, amazing. Sex only works if you're selling sex. And that's why, from a Miley Cyrus perspective, it worked phenomenally well. It's also why organizations like this that do these kinds of things, it bombs. And we talk about how horrible it is. We don't buy from them. We boycott them. I mean, there's all sorts of case studies, lots of case studies in the book, by the way, about the kinds of things that people try using sex because we have that animal innate need in our brains to have it. That's just how human beings are wired. So we try to use that human nature to sell. And it doesn't work unless we're selling sex. So, spin sucks. I get a lot of feedback on the word sucks. I'm sorry if you think it's a bad word. It's actually ironic in the way it's used because, as it turns out, spin stinks does not work as well. So, if you think that sucks is a bad word, I'm going to swear several times. I don't use any other words, though, however. Okay, so there are 4 things I want to talk about. Whisper campaigns, media manipulation, unethical business values and ethics, and unethical business practices, and astroturfing. And then we're going to talk about the things that you can do the right way. Whisper campaigns. This is Kelly Dietrich. Kelly Dietrich is my husband. Kelly and I have been married for 11 years. When I met Kelly Dietrich, I was not interested in him at the least. Not my type of guy, really nice guy, tall, good looking. I, like the bad boys, like we all do as we go through our lives. And he's in politics, and he's a politician, for lack of a better word. He's very, very good at charming the pants off of people. I didn't really mean that as a pun, but I guess it works. Now I'm embarrassed. Because he's so charming and charismatic, everybody loves Kelly Dietrich. And so people will say to me, oh, when do I get to meet your husband? And I'm like, oh, you never do, because my friends always like Kelly more than they like me. So I never take him anywhere, never. Last year, I spoke at Content Jam, which is a big content conference in Chicago in October every year. If you're interested in content marketing, one of the best. I spoke at that, brought my whole team in for the conference. And as we finished the conference, we were walking across the street to the bar for the networking event. And I'm telling the story of how Kelly likes to put his feet in women's hair. If it's the longer the better, he loves to put his feet in it. I failed to mention that it was when he was 2. So I'm just telling the story, right? And somebody on my team turns and looks at me and goes, oh, so you have a whisper campaign about your husband. Because now they all think he's kind of weird because he likes to put his feet in women's hair, and they don't like him as much as they like me. Winner! That's a whisper campaign, a very funny example, but this actually happens in real life. One of the, I think this was May 2011, when Google Circles came out. Remember the social circles before Google Plus, before they brought out Google Plus, and we didn't really know what these circles were and what it all meant. Well, a PR firm, a very large, reputable PR firm, was hired by an unnamed, well, now you know it's Facebook because I already put it up there. It was hired by Facebook. And Facebook said to PR firm, what we would like you to do is call journalists and talk about the things that these social circles are going to do. It was not based on fact. It was based on opinion. It was based on gossip. It was based on rumor. It was things like, oh, it's going to completely take away your privacy. It's, you know, if you use social circles instead of Facebook, then your friends and family won't be able to find you. And they started creating all of this controversy around social circles. Well, as it turns out, there was really one smart journalist who said, well, wait a second, who are you calling on behalf of? And the PR person said, well, I can't disclose that. And the journalist said, well, then I can't do the story. Hangs up the phone. Well, it turns out that it was Facebook who had hired Burson Marsteller to create a whisper campaign against Google. And at the time, so this was actually just 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago, I was really up in arms about it. Now, if you read Spin Sucks, if you don't already read Spin Sucks, I hope you will by the blog and the book, but I hope you will by the end of this. You know that I'm fairly opinionated. And I was up in arms. I was like, this cannot happen. As an industry, we have to talk differently about this. I went to PRSA. We had really strict conversations about it. You know, PRSA was very welcoming in listening to me, but as a membership organization, there are some things they can and can't do. And so I started blogging about it because I was very angry about this kind of thing. And I remember Jeremy Pepper, who actually is in Silicon Valley, said, but Ginny, this happens all the time. Okay, just because it happens all the time doesn't mean it's right. Just because people do this doesn't make it right. So why are we allowing these kinds of things to happen? Happens in Hollywood too, as it turns out, around Oscars time. And you'll notice this every year. The publicists will start saying, and I use publicists instead of communications professionals, completely different. Publicists will start going to journalists and saying, well, did you hear that Neil deGrasse Tyson had actually saw gravity and said that some of it's inaccurate? You know what? Of course it's inaccurate. It's a freaking movie. It's fiction. It's Hollywood. Yes, it's based on true life. Argo, Zero Dark 30, there are all these movies that are based on true stories, but it's fictionalized for Hollywood. And so people start saying, well, that didn't actually happen. Or you know that scene at the end of Argo when they're leaving the airport where you're like on the edge of your seat going, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Didn't actually happen. No kidding. Really? They didn't actually do something to make the movie make you want to go to the movie and create that emotion where you were on the edge of your seat? Of course, they did. But this happens so that the people who are voting or making the decisions for who's going to win the Oscars have a negative impression. So whisper campaigns are created to have negative impressions about somebody. Happens in Washington, D.C., where Karl Rove and Hillary Clinton are having this big fight right now. It's pretty incredible to watch, but it happens. And what will happen throughout your career is somebody in your office, in your agency, will say, you know, we should go and look at what the competitors are doing and have journalists talk about the negative things that they're doing. It's not ethical. It's wrong. And there are only so many of us that can make that change. It's us in the industry who can do that. How many of you, when you say you're a communications professional or a PR professional, what's the reaction you get from a stranger? Why? What else? What do you do again? Spin doctor. That's why we call the blog Spin Sucks, because over and over and over again, you know, I say I own an integrated marketing communications firm, and they go, oh, you're a spin doctor, or you lie for a living. No, I don't lie for a living. But these are the examples, these are the reasons people have this perception of what it is that we do. And we are the only ones who can change it. Now, I recognize the fact that it's easier for me to stand up here and say, we have to stop it, and we have to say no, and we have to stand up to our bosses because I own a company and I get to decide what clients we work with and whether or not we do certain things for them. I recognize that. That said, every single person in this room has the opportunity to say, no, actually, that's not the right way to do things, and here's how we're going to do it instead. And we'll get to the here's how we're going to do it instead in a minute. AstroTurfing. Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News, went to his communications team a couple of years ago, and he said, I think there's about 50 on his communications team. And he said, here's what I want you to do. There's lots and lots of negative stuff out there on the social networks. I want each of you to create 5 fake accounts and start posting positive reviews about us. Anytime anybody says something negative, we're going to split up the social networks, we're going to split up the blog comments, we're going to split it all up. You're responsible for 10 blogs and this social network. We're going to split it all up, and you're each going to, anytime anybody says something negative, you're going to say something positive. So 50 people have 5 fake accounts doing this. Don't say that they work for Fox News, aren't posting under their real names, posting anonymously in some cases, and they're out there saying positive things about Fox News. Ethical? I remember, I think it was probably 2007, a client had a new app and they were trying to get it up in the iTunes store, up in reviews and all that, and they asked us as the PR firm to start posting good reviews. Not ethical, not good stuff. So we're the ones who have to say, hang on a second. Not only is it not ethical, but as soon as somebody finds out, and they will find out because there are lots of people out there who want to prove that the internet is wrong, they will find out, you are going to be in bigger trouble than just having the negative stuff out there to begin with. This is my very favorite story from the book, so if you read the book, you can skip over these pages because I've already told you. The Halifax Plimpton reporter received a letter from a man, and we'll just call him Joe Smith. In the letter to the editor, Joe Smith said, Congress is thinking about doing away with Medicare. I urge you to run this letter so that we can talk to Congress about how important Medicare is to seniors. The editor read it and was kind of like, not really a political thing I want to get into, filed the letter. A couple weeks later, the phone rings, picks it up, which is odd because reporters don't generally pick up their phones anymore, but he did. Picks it up, and the guy says, this is Joe Smith. I wrote you a letter about Medicare going away for seniors and pleading with Congress. Did you receive it? And he said, yes, actually I did. And he started to ask some questions. And he thought, wait a second, this seems odd. So he's digging into it a little bit more, as journalists are wont to do. And finally, he says, what's your name again? And he says, Joe Smith. And he says, I see. And who are you? And he says, well, I live in the county. This is my address. And he details his address. And then the guy says, okay, well, let me call you back, and takes down a phone number, hangs up the phone. He goes and he looks up the guy's name and calls the guy. Not the phone number that he saw, but the one he found on Google or Yellow Pages or wherever. He calls the guy and says, did you write this letter? Did I just have a conversation with you? No. Man has no idea what he's talking about. So he calls the number that the guy gave him, and guess what? It's a lobbying firm in DC. So a lobbying firm was going through, let's just call it the Yellow Pages, and choosing people, or the White Pages, I guess, choosing people in the city, in the community, writing letters to the editor in those people's names, signing them as those people, and sending them in, without those people knowing. You're looking at me like, what the heck? It happens all the time. And to Jeremy Pepper's point, what are you so upset about, Ginny? It happens all the time. The problem is just because it happens all the time doesn't make it right. And I'm sure every single one of you had a mother who said, just because everybody jumps off the bridge doesn't mean you're going to do it too. The pharmacy industry does it. The tobacco industry, of course, is famous for it. Coke has done it. Microsoft has done it. Facebook has done it. There are lots and lots of big organizations who do it. There are lots of small organizations who do it. We have a client who's a $10 million business. There were a couple of things that he wanted us to do. We actually had a client say to me, I can't get the governor of Indiana to call me back. Could the guy, he goes, you know the guy that works for you that used to be the newspaper reporter? I said, yeah. He goes, could you have him call and use his old credentials to see if he can get this information? I'm like, no. So you have to educate our clients and our executives about why this is inappropriate. Okay, so whisper campaigns, astroturfing. Let's talk media manipulation. Michael Arrington, TechCrunch, sold it to Huffington Post with this philosophy. Getting it right is expensive, getting it first is cheap. They are famous for getting the news, I'll put in quotes, out there as quickly as they can, and then changing the facts when they become available. No journalistic ethics. Now, you can argue the fact that he did sell to Huffington Post for a lot of money and rode off into the sunset. However, he was fired almost immediately. He didn't get to work out his contract. He didn't make as much money as he wanted to or thought he was going to because he didn't work out his contract. So there's a lot of underlying issues to these kinds of things. So yeah, you look at this sort of overnight success story where you go, yeah, but he sold the company, made a lot of money. Actually, he didn't make as much as he thought he was going to and got kicked out of his contract because of the way he behaves. Getting it right is expensive, getting it first is cheap. This is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. And Joe, was it you who asked the question about instant gratification? And yeah, our executives want this constantly. We're dealing with this all the time because of stuff like this. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and I'm going to rain on my own parade by saying that right now because I'm coming back to it later. And speaking of Hal Higdon, marathon instead of sprint. Huh? Another thing that's happening is we have this really interesting gray line. So Ketchum is a worldwide agency. They are headquartered actually in Chicago, but they have a Moscow office. It is relatively known that if countries work together, that world peace is a little more attainable because then we start to work with our friends versus there's this big entity out here who we don't like and we don't like their policies. So the Moscow office works with the Russian government. Makes sense, right? They're in Moscow, Russia is in Russia. I mean, it makes sense. Just because there's a U.S., they're headquartered in the U.S., may or may not have any implication. The Moscow office works with President Putin to write a letter to the editor at the New York Times. In it, he's pleading with America as to why we should be concerned with what's going on in Syria. Politics aside, a letter to the editor ran in the New York Times for the Russian president. So, the PR industry looks at this and goes, well, wait a second. Is this ethical? You have this Moscow office of a US-based PR firm working with the New York office to get this placed in the New York Times. The New York Times works with the PR professionals to get it placed. The PR communications professionals probably wrote it, because that's what we do. And I mean, President Putin didn't write this. He probably signed off on it, but he didn't write it. So there's all this gray line in terms of how these things are working. Should the New York Times disclose that they worked with Ketchum on this story? Should we disclose that we're writing feature stories and speeches and blog posts and sometimes even tweets for our clients and our executives? There's this really interesting gray line right now. I don't have the right answer, but it's something for all of us to be thinking about, because my entire career I've written for clients. That's what we do, right? So there's this whole gray matter area right now where we're all trying to figure it out. If you're a blogger, you're supposed to disclose. If you're a journalist, you don't have to. So there's all this interesting conversation. Something to be thinking about and something to keep your eye on as you go into your careers and build your careers. Has anybody read this? Probably. I was really mad about this book, and a friend of mine said, I refused to read it. I was like, I'm not reading this book. A friend of mine said, you need to read this book. So I read it. Trust Me on Lying is essentially blowing the gates off of the whole media industry. Because what Ryan Holiday did is he hired 2 virtual assistants, and he said, we're going to go through HARO, and we're going to respond to every inquiry that we can. And it doesn't matter if it's about vinyl records or insomnia or software, we are going to be an expert on it, and we're going to make up names for each of these as experts. So Bob Smith's going to be the vinyl expert, Joe Schmo is going to be the insomnia expert, and we're going to talk about all these things. And he blows it out of the water. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, CNN, big time publications and media outlets ran interviews with him, quoted him as a source for these kinds of things, and he's not an expert in any of them. Now, it made me really angry because I can't believe this stuff happens, but it happens. And so, I mean, I think he's still, I a couple of days ago. I think he's still number 3 on Amazon because he literally, and can you imagine being a journalist at the Wall Street Journal and finding out that this guy that you had talked to and developed a relationship with had actually lied to you for a year and a half, and you had quoted him as a source in several stories, and now you have to go back and retract? What a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. But it's happening. And we're under so much pressure for that instant gratification and for that need to have it now that we're doing things that are unethical in order to get going and get it started right now. And then a couple other things that are happening. How many of you blog? About half. How many of you receive pitches from PR professionals as part of your blogging? How many of them are good? 10%? Less than? 5%? 3%? 5%? Mitch Stroll is famous for saying, if you pitch me something that I write about, it works 100% of the time. But we're under this pressure for quantity over quality. We're under this pressure for increased Facebook fans and YouTube viewers and Twitter followers and media impressions and media clips, and we're not looking at quality. We're not looking at sentiment. We're not looking at message pull-through. We're looking at how many things we can get out there. So we go and we say, well, I sent it to 1,000 journalists. It's not my fault only 2 ran with it. Here's what's happening. And I'm going to read this to you even though I know everybody can read. Hi, Marshall. I know that you're interested in innovative applications that pull in consumers and offer a plethora of features. Are you going to be doing a roundup of sorts around the top applications? If so, I might have some info you would be interested in. Thanks, Margaret. And then Marshall writes back, info. Yeah, sure, I'm always interested in info about stuff. I was thinking about rounding things up. If you've got info that would help me do that, please send it my way. Unfortunately, it's funny because it's true. This is what happens. I'll bet you by the time I sit back down and look at my phone, I probably have between 30 and 40 emails from communications professionals pitching me on something that makes no difference to me at all. I'm in Chicago, so they're pitching me ribbon cuttings that happen in Chicago. They're pitching me franchise openings. They're pitching me tax services, stuff that we don't write about, stuff that would be so easy to go build my list in Cision or Vocus or Burrell's or whatever you use, click on the link, spinsucks.com, and oh my gosh, under the header it says, Professional Development for PR and Marketing Pros. I think probably this franchise opening doesn't fit. But nobody's doing that research because we're all under such immense pressure to get it done now, and do a lot of it. I'm sure everybody remembers the Kenneth Cole debacle. When the protests were happening in Egypt, he took the hashtag because it was trending and said millions are in uproar about my new spring collection. Haha, you're funny guy. Horrible, horrible, horrible example of newsjacking. Horrible. He comes out a few minutes later and he says, and by the way, the KC means that he's the one who actually tweeted it, not an intern. Fabulous. He comes out with an apology that was actually a non-apology because it was, I'm sorry if I offended anybody. Yeah, that's not an apology. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. You offended the whole world, but okay. Then he says, but what's the problem? Traffic to my website is up? Yeah, of course, because everybody's going over to watch the train wreck. You know, sales are up, and then the next quarter he reported that sales were down, and then Wall Street delisted him, and then his CEO quit. So this kind of stuff does not work. The interesting thing about it is he tried it again about 4 months ago. He tried it again. I can't remember what it was, but nobody paid attention. And guess what? His traffic didn't increase because nobody wanted to see. This kind of stuff does not work. The problem is lots of executives ask for it because they see their peers asking for it. They see their peers being quote unquote successful with it. And so they say, well, wait a second, I want this too. Jason Falls wrote a guest post for us, and I'm giving you a sneak peek because it doesn't run until next week. But he talks about how he had a client who had a really great product but had no online presence. So of course they start out by helping him build a website and creating content and building his social networks. And he said every Friday he would get a call from the CEO that would say, how many more Facebook fans do we have this week than next? and he'd answer the question every week. We finally came to realize that it happened at the same time every Friday because he had a standing golf game and wanted to be able to brag to his friends about how much his Facebook fans had increased. So these are the kinds of things we're dealing with. And unfortunately, a lot of it is ego-driven. So I call them the vanity metrics. We have to provide the vanity metrics while we also talk about the kinds of things that make sense. And if David were still here, I would kiss him, because some of the things he's talking about is exactly what we should be doing. We should be a profit center. We should be an investment. We should have a seat at the table, and we still don't, because we're still talking in increased Facebook fans and media impressions and number of clips. Those are the wrong metrics. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. How many of you have actually run a marathon? Just a few of you? When you run a marathon, can you just go out and run 26.2 miles? No. What do you have to do? So you start out, you might actually run half a mile to begin with, and then you run a mile. Some people may do couch to 5K and then couch to 10K or whatever it happens to be. Then you run a few 5Ks, then you run a few 10Ks, then you move up to a half a marathon, and then when you're in your marathon training, you actually run 20 or 21 miles, sometimes 22 depending on what program you're doing, but you never actually run the 26 miles during your marathon training. So you're out there and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. I'm running. I've run 20 miles before. I can do this. I only have 6.2 miles left. Oh, I still have 5 miles left. Oh my gosh, I still have 4 miles. Okay, it's only a 5K. I can do it. I'm going to die. And you're trying to get across the finish line because you've hit that proverbial wall where you're like, I cannot possibly do another 3 miles, even though a week from now you're going to go out and run 3 miles like it's no big deal. We have to think about our communications in the same way. When you have a IMC program that starts in 2011 and ends in 2014, because that's why you're building a 3-year program, and you have to have 327 conversations in 2 weeks about how we have to stay the course, we have to think about it as a marathon. And I'm so glad he went before I did, because he set me up perfectly. He doesn't even know it. You'll have to tell him. We have to think about it from that perspective. Lots of executives will understand the marathon approach because lots of them have run marathons. Lots of them will understand the century approach. Same thing with cycling, but 100 miles. Actually, by the way, it's easier to run 100 miles or easier to ride 100 miles than to run 26.2. Just put that out there. They will understand those kinds of things because those are the kinds of things lots of them do, or their peers do it and they're jealous. So when you put it in that to them in that perspective, they go, oh, okay. Although my editor said to me when I was writing Spin Sucks, he's like, the stupid marathon analogy you keep using through the book, I feel like I have to get off the stupid couch and go run. And I'm like, yeah, side effect. As we're doing this, and this is integrated marketing communications, we have to integrate. The very first book I wrote was co-authored with Jeff Livingston called Marketing in the Round, and we talked about breaking down the silos and get working together. We have to figure out ways to do this. It's not going to work if we don't. And I'll give you a very simple example of why this is. The Boston Globe, I was talking to a journalist there, and she was lamenting to me about how PR professionals don't do 2 things. We don't send multimedia, we don't send videos, photos, images with our news releases, and we don't help spread the news. So if I'm writing a story for you, I want to know that you're going to use your social networks and you're going to use your own content and you're going to use your website traffic to help me increase my page views. As an industry, we're not doing those things. Journalists are responsible for increased page views and multimedia. The Chicago Tribune started a trend where they fired all of their photographers and said to their reporters, you are now in charge of your photos, your videos, all of that. We no longer have photographers. Now, I think it was somewhere in Florida did the same thing. So it's starting this trend where photographers are being fired and they are going to have to rely on us to provide these kinds of things. If a story runs in the Boston Globe on our company or our client's company, they want us to use our social networks and the client's social networks to get that news out. They want us to blog about behind the scenes kind of things, the Dell Earnhardt and girlfriend picture, getting their credentials picture. They want that behind the scenes kinds of stuff. If the Boston Globe is doing an interview, let's include some stuff on our blog that that wasn't included in the story that's interesting or would be interesting to our readers and followers. Help them help you. That's a really simple example of integrating all of the pieces. I include email marketing and lead generation under paid media. Email it out to those that don't have social networks. Help journalists help you. Great example of how you can really quickly and easily explain. And I'll tell you what, when somebody says to you, we'll just go, call the PR guy and get the press release out. When somebody says that to you, you have to say, wait a second. The news release not only is not going to work because I'm sending it to 1,000 people and only two on our list are actually interested, and we don't have any social power and we don't have any owned content and we're not doing any email marketing, they're not going to do anything unless you're, have killed the president of some big company. Like the New York Times is not going to do your story. So you have to go to executives and say, this is the way it works today. This is what we have to do to prepare, and this is the only way you're going to get in the New York Times or on CNN or on Bloomberg News or whatever it happens to be. Then you're going to have some negative criticism. And this is an executive's biggest fear. People are going to say bad things about us. Yep, people are. And the more successful you are perceived, the more your negative reviews you're going to have. So, great example of this, OXO, they're not an exciting company. They make dustpans and brooms and things. Probably most of you have one of their products in your kitchen. As it turns out, they use the inventor community. So if you have a great idea for a kitchen product, cleaning product, but you don't have the wherewithal or the stamina or the patience or the knowledge or the time to build a company and sell this product yourself, you can go to OXO and say, I have this great idea. Would you like to buy the patent? They buy the patent from the inventor, and then the inventor gets money as royalties as they're sold. Great business model. Well, their competitor, Quirky, also does the same thing. By the way, their headquartered offices are 2 blocks away from one another. And some of their employees are dating one another. Some of them are actually married, working at competitive companies. The CEOs know one another, run in the same circles as they would, being in the same city. Quirky decides that OXO is stealing from them and stealing the same designs and inventions from their inventor community and taking it to their own stuff. So instead of having a conversation with the OXO CEO, they take out a billboard in New York City and call OXO's liars and cheaters and scammers. Billboard, huge billboard, in between the 2 offices. Amazing, amazing, great tactic. So the OXO CEO is like, well, this is great. Leaves his office, walks down the stairs, goes out the door, walks around the corner, goes up the elevator, sits in the lobby and says, I'm going to see Quirky's CEO. And they have a conversation. Why was it that you didn't? And they start to have it out. Well, the Quirky CEO is so adamant and, quite frankly, a little arrogant that he refuses to believe that this didn't happen. He refuses to believe the OXO CEO had nothing to do with this and is going to keep his billboard up. So OXO writes in January of last year on their blog, here's what happened, here are the facts, here's how we support our inventor community, you make up your own mind. Quirky came back with I'm going to win and I don't care what you say, and it was really whiny and inappropriate, not fact-based, completely emotional, and everybody who wrote about this, I actually had a reporter from Entrepreneurs send this to me. And she said, I want you to look at this and tell me which company you would support. Everybody supported OXO because they took emotion out, they were rational, they apologized, and they provided facts. So when you have executives who say, we can't be out there on the web because people are going to say negative things about you, you can't avoid that. It's in how you handle it that makes the difference. Elon Musk, the man that I'm most jealous of because he's my age and a gazillionaire, founder of Tesla. Some of you may remember this. When Tesla first came to market, they were only issuing a few cars, and they said to the New York Times automotive reporter, we want to give you a car for the weekend, and we'd like you to drive it. Now, there are a few things that have to happen. You have to if it's below 30 degrees, it has to be more than 80% charged. You can't drive it for more than 300 miles without giving it another charge. There's like all these stipulations that as normal car drivers, as we've grown up driving cars, we don't have to worry about. So you're learning a new technology when you drive these cars. The New York Times reporter takes it out, drives the car. Friday afternoon, great. Saturday, great. Saturday night, it gets to like 28 degrees, 27 degrees. Goes out Sunday morning, the car won't start. Has to have it towed. Big, huge pain in the butt. Imagine this, the New York Times. You've got the New York Times driving this car and he has to have the car towed. Has to have the car towed, gets it towed, gets back home. He writes a scathing review. Scathing. Well, here's the thing about Tesla. They have everything computerized. So they can go into your data and find out what you did and what you didn't do. So they can say, yeah, well, actually the reason it's not working is because it doesn't have a charge or you need a new battery, whatever it happens to be. So they went into the data, and Elon Musk, who tweeted, the first thing he did, which made my skin crawl, he tweeted that the New York Times reporter was an idiot, which I think, if I were consulting him, I'd probably use a softer word. Maybe. But then he came back and he said, actually, here's what happened. It was 27 degrees and it was only 30% charged. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. Took all emotion out after that initial tweet, provided the facts, and the New York Times reporter had to issue a retraction. Now, how many of you are journalists, have done any journalism? You know that a retraction's not good, right? And when it's at the New York Times, you're probably going to lose your job. Probably. But he took the criticism from arguably one of the top newspapers in the country, took the criticism. He was emotional at first. Then he took the emotion out of it and he handled it from a rational perspective. So when you have your executives say, we can't be there because people will say negative things about us, it's in how you handle it. If you apologize and you provide a solution, people are much more forgiving than if you're whiny and stomp your feet and say, he's just a jerk. One of the things that you also can be thinking about, and this is something that most organizations do not do, is telling your story from the customer and the employee perspective. We're all about, getting our testimonials in so-and-so thinks we're great. Let's get rid of those kinds of things. I stole this from Jay Bear, but I told him I was stealing it, so I figured that's not stealing. Harvest the stories about your company from an employee's perspective and from the customer's perspective. MailChimp does this really well. If you go onto the MailChimp website, you can actually see videos where they've gone out and talked to their customers about what the customer does and how they use MailChimp in their business. So it's not this great big, we love MailChimp, MailChimp's awesome. It's this story about what I do in my business. And oh, by the way, I use MailChimp to help me generate X number of leads to generate X number of customers. They talk about it from that perspective. The story I will tell you is I was in Omaha a couple of years ago, and I was doing a workshop, so there were only 12 people in there. It was for CEOs. I love talking to CEOs because inevitably about 70% of them are like, this is a fad, it's going to change, it won't happen in my industry until I retire, young people aren't making decisions yet, and at the beginning of the 3 hours, and I'm like, yeah, I never heard any of this before, come on. Give it to me. And then by the end of the 3 hours, they're like, oh. So we're in this workshop, and I get to this point where I'm talking about telling your story from employees and customers' perspective. And this guy raises his hand. He's like, okay, I've been with you the whole time, but I just can't do this. I'm in a commodity business. It's not interesting. Nobody cares. They just want the lowest price. And I said, okay, what do you do? And he says, we make pens. I said, oh, are you Bic? He said, no. We make pens for the military. Apparently the military needs pens that are special, and they're $200 each. Or $198, depending on where you are. So they make these pens, but the interesting thing about the pens is they have to be manually produced. So no, there's not a machine doing it. I don't understand the intricacies of why that is, but he tells me that he only hires people without sight because people who cannot see are not distracted. And because they're so intricate and have to be manually put together, he can't have people, constantly distracted by who's moving or who's going to the bathroom or what they're taking, reading material they're taking to the lunchroom, or they can't be distracted by that. They have to be singularly focused. I said, do your competitors do that? And he says, well, no. Might be a point of differentiation, kind of interesting. Then I find out that one employee climbed Mount Hood unassisted, and another one is the #3 gospel singer in the world. Okay, come on. A blind person climbing a mountain by himself? Kind of interesting. So I said to him, here's what I want you to do. I understand you're in a commodity business. I understand you're not sold. I want you to take 3 employees and I want you to have them tell their story on video. Maybe you go and see the one perform, or you go and have another one, go hike a mountain with him or something. Like, get them on video. And this was in September. I want you to have it out by Christmas. And he said he promised me he would. Well, about a week before Christmas, I go on his website and guess what? Nothing's there. So I called him and he goes, "Oh man, I thought you forgot." I hadn't forgotten. And so he said, all right, by February 1st. And so this was February of last year. He put them up, he got them up. They're great videos. Very well produced, really nicely done. And he called me right before Christmas this year and he said, "I'm so glad you made me do this. Not only are we no longer competing on price, but we're kicking butt and taking names because we have opened up the doors and the windows and we have let our customers see who work inside the organization. Because guess what? People buy from people. They don't buy from organizations. When they buy from organizations, you're in a pricing war. You're a commodity. When they buy from people, they don't care what it costs because they trust you and they know you're going to take care of them. Humanize the company. The way to do that is through your customers and your employees." DIY, this is what I call DIY media relations. Commenting on blogs and articles is the very best way to build a relationship with a journalist or a blogger. Very best. Because you're on their site, you're providing thoughtful commentary, you're having a good conversation, they might be getting additional story ideas, they're going to use you as a source. They're going to ask you to guest blog. They're going to ask you for content. They're going to ask you for feature stories. They're going to feature your executives or your clients because you've built a relationship on something that they own. Great example of this is in 2008, Steve Strauss, the business columnist for USA Today, wrote an article called "Should Entrepreneurs Twitter?" No. I can't remember the 4 reasons, but it was like, it's a waste of time, there's too much information. It was, there were these 4 things. And it was very clear for those of us who were on Twitter, using Twitter, that he had never used it before. So there were people that had commented that were like, "You're an idiot, you clearly have never used Twitter before, you don't know what you're talking about." Well, it was 2008, the economy had tanked, I had a little extra time on my hands. So I wrote a comment that was very, I thought, thoughtful, and had 4 reasons that counterattacked, or had the counterpoint to his 4 reasons. And I said 4 reasons you should. Helps your business grow, helps your network, whatever they happen to be. Well, he read that and he called me and he said, very first words out of his mouth after he introduced himself was, "So I've never used Twitter." And I was like, no kidding. Couldn't tell. We had about a half an hour, 45-minute conversation where I educated him on Twitter and how to use it. And then he said, "Can we go on the record?" Yeah, you're USA Today, of course we go on the record. And a week later, he wrote, "Twitter for Small Business Reconsidered." And today, so I was quoted in that, I think he called me charming. "I saw firsthand what a powerful tool Twitter can be for spreading a message and creating instant feedback. Mea culpa, I did not get that before. Score 1 for the Twitter Nation." So he said, okay, I get it, understand there's a use for it, wrote an article about that. Today, he calls me every time he has a social media question. Sometimes a little much. I'm like, "Steve, there's this thing called Google. Use it." But we've created a great relationship because I took the time to not call him an idiot, not say you've clearly never used Twitter. I gave him a counterpoint to every one of his points. So it's a very interesting way to do that. Where's Julie? Julie, thank you. Julie Long, raise your hand so everybody can see, is one of the SpinSucks brand ambassadors. So when Marketing in the Round came out in 2012, I did 63 trips in 52 weeks. It wasn't so much fun. It's really not fun not to sleep in your own bed, more than once a week. So this time, when SpinSucks came out, I said, okay, not only am I going to be really, really picky and choosy about the conferences that I speak at, but I don't want to be on the road as much. We still have to sell a book. We still have to market and sell a book. So we decided to do a brand ambassador program. Part of that brand ambassador program was you had to read the book, which you got a free copy. You also had to write a review, an honest review, and disclose that you received a copy of the book. And if you could write a blog post about it, great. Julie wrote a blog post for SteamFeed as one of our brand ambassadors. It went all over the place. I mean, I opened my Twitter stream and was like, oh, I don't know what to do right now. I mean, everyone was tweeting it, everyone. I would credit a small percentage to SteamFeed, Jerry. And, you know, really, Julie and I built a relationship through the comments on Spin Sucks and through that brand ambassador program. When I finally met her today, I feel like I already know her. I feel like we already have a relationship because we built that relationship through the online world. This is very, very easy to do, and so I'll call it DIY media relations. There is no wizard behind the screen. It's all about authentic, honest, ethical communications. It's really hard in today's day and age. We just had a meeting with a new business prospect where I thought we were doing really awesome. We were like, yeah, we're going to get this business. It'll be about $600,000 in revenue. That's awesome. It'll be one of our biggest clients. And through the meeting, I'm thinking this in my head, yes, 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 yes. And then, this is what you get for being arrogant in your head. The prospect said, well, I don't understand why we can't just start tweeting to the organizations that we want and just be done with it. And I went, I'm sorry, what? That's not how Twitter works. And he goes, clearly you don't know what you're talking about. Stood up and walked out of the room, and I was like, I'm sorry, okay. So we did not get the business because I told him that you can't just tweet at organizations and get them to do what you want. So I know that I'm right and he's wrong, but it's also lost us a $600,000 piece of business. It's really, really, really difficult in today's day and age. People want instant gratification. There are social media experts and gurus out there that say you will get it. There are people out there that say, yes, if you build a Twitter stream, people will automatically buy from you. There are people out there who will give you all this wrong information, and executives are hearing this, and they're saying, oh yeah, it's the diet pill. If I take this diet pill, I'm going to lose 500 pounds and never gain it back. It's the same mentality. It doesn't work. Just like the diet doesn't work, it might work short term, long term it doesn't. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Remember that spin sucks. And the reason being is that we cannot afford to be unethical. We cannot afford to lie or stretch the truth. We cannot afford to hide our heads in the sand. We have to think about it from a longer term perspective. Google's going to change their algorithms, customers are going to be upset, things are going to change, there's going to be a new social network that we have to worry about. If we stay the course, we decide that this is the strategy, and we remember it constantly, we will win in the end. It may take longer, it may take 3 years, but we will win in the end. Do I have time for questions? A little bit? Questions so I can drink some water? No questions? Yes, Monica.
I was wondering what your opinion is on Wikipedia and the ban against public relations people updating.
So she asked, for those in the back, my opinion on Wikipedia and PR professionals, marketing professionals actually, who have been banned from updating. First of all, I think it's a stupid ban, but I understand why it is. It makes it very, very difficult for some of us to do our jobs. That said, if you work inside an organization, agencies can't do this, but if you work inside on the corporate side or in a nonprofit and you work for the organization, you can make the changes, but you have to disclose and you have to have it approved. So you have to go through a longer process. So it's actually easier if you're not a marketer, but you coach or mentor somebody through the process. It's a big pain in the butt. I can't have a Wikipedia page for myself because I own a PR firm. It's a pain in the butt. I'm learning a little bit. We just had a guest blogger talk about it or blog about it for us this past week. So I'm learning more, but yeah, it's a huge pain.
How do you advise clients that come to you and ask you to update their Wikipedia pages? Do you tell them that you can't?
Yeah, if clients ask us to do it, we tell them we can't. Usually the executive's assistant will do it. Is beer next, or is there something else? Am I in between the beer?
I was just going to ask, can you talk a little bit about breaking down like the barriers between, I know a lot of times the PR side, we want to retweet the reporter's stories, but when marketing controls the Twitter, they say, sorry, no, it's not part of our brand. So like, can you just kind of talk about that?
It's so frustrating. I think you have to do it, a lot of what David was talking about, you have to do it and continue to educate. So you have to find wins like that. Now, if you're retweeting stories and then you have other people get upset, you know, you have to fight that battle as well. But it's all about education. I will tell you that I grew up at Fleischman Hillard, and I had a small stint at an advertising agency to build their PR department. And I spent most of my days educating my advertising colleagues on what PR was. And I got sick of it. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So at some point, you may not be able to win the battle. But it's the same thing with the executives. Give them what they want and then continue to educate. And it's interesting that marketing would own the social and not communications. I also find that in large agencies, not all of them, but you know, some of the large agencies have brought digital in, but they don't talk to the communications side either. And they're all inside an agency. Battles for profits, battles for budgets, I mean, it happens. So yeah, I think it's just, or make friends with them and beg and plead. I always say make friends with the CFO because they're the ones who make the decision. Kind of same thing, make friends and please, just this once. Okay.